もう可愛いな。会社ではこんな顔見せないのに。
Have you ever felt lonely, even while standing right beside the person you love? Not abandoned, not rejected, just quietly unseen. That kind of loneliness doesn't arrive with arguments or slammed doors. It arrives softly, almost politely, slipping into the spaces we don't think to guard. And by the time we notice it, it already knows our routines. Mori didn't think of herself as lonely. On paper, her life was balanced. She and John worked at the same company, understood each other's pressures, and spoke a shared language shaped by deadlines and quiet encouragement. Their relationship grew naturally, almost effortlessly, out of mutual respect. At home, they moved with the ease of a well-practiced duet meals, conversations, silences that felt safe rather than empty. At work, they were steady allies, trusting each other without needing constant reassurance. Stability in its purest form. Yet emotional stability can sometimes hide emotional stagnation. Not because love is gone, but because it has become predictable. And predictability, while comforting, can also dull our awareness of what we need to feel alive. The shift begins without drama. One ordinary day, Mori encounters Oda, her superior, and someone who once held a meaningful place in her emotional history. Their past was not defined by harm or bitterness, but by timing and unfinished understanding. Seeing him again doesn't create chaos. It creates something far more subtle, a quiet disturbance. Old memories surface, not as longing, but as questions she thought she had already answered. Soon after, Mori is assigned to work alongside Oda. Professionally, it makes sense. Emotionally, it doesn't. She feels resistance, not because she wants something, but because she fears wanting anything at all. Still, responsibility wins. Mori tells herself this is just work, that professionalism is a shield strong enough to hold the past at bay. That moment, she notices Oda differently, not as a memory, but as a presence. His composure, his clarity in decision-making, the way he carries responsibility without needing validation. These observations don't feel like betrayal. They feel like recognition. And recognition can be unsettling, especially when it awakens parts of us that have been quiet for too long. Nothing visibly changes. Jun remains kind, attentive, steady. And that is precisely what makes Mori's inner conflict harder to name. There is no villain here, no obvious mistake, only an emotional dissonance that grows in the absence of words. Sometimes, the most difficult conflicts are not about choosing between people, but about understanding why something within us has begun to shift. Mori stands at that threshold between who she has been, who she is with, and who she might be becoming, without yet realizing how fragile silence can be when emotions remain unnamed. Mori doesn't wake up one morning feeling different. The change happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, like a shift in temperature that the body notices before the mind does. Outwardly, her days look the same. Meetings, messages, shared meals, familiar routines. Inwardly, however, something has begun to loosen its hold. Not her commitment, not her values, but her sense of emotional clarity. Working alongside Oda, places her in a state of quiet alertness. She listens more carefully than usual, not because she intends to, but because her mind seems to anticipate him. For Mori, this becomes a mirror she didn't expect. She starts noticing the parts of herself that respond not to romance, but to competence, presence, and emotional steadiness. These are not forbidden qualities. They are human needs. Yet when they surface in unexpected places, they can feel confusing, even disloyal. At the same time, her relationship with Jun begins to change in a way that is difficult to articulate. There are no arguments, no accusations, just a growing silence where curiosity once lived. Jun remains caring, reliable, deeply invested. But emotional closeness is not maintained by good intentions alone. It requires ongoing intentional acts of noticing, of asking, of staying emotionally awake. Without realizing it, both of them have begun to assume that understanding no longer needs to be spoken. Mori doesn't share her inner conflict, not because she wants to hide something, but because she doesn't yet have language for it. She is not reaching for something new. She is trying to understand why something old feels less vivid. This kind of emotional confusion often comes with guilt, and guilt tends to silence us rather than invite conversation. Oda, meanwhile, misreads the situation, perhaps out of unresolved feelings of his own, or perhaps out of emotional immaturity. He reaches out to Jun. His message is not cruel, but it is careless. He frames Mori's uncertainty as something that belongs to him, rather than something Mori is struggling to understand within herself. In doing so, he removes nuance from a fragile situation and replaces it with tension. For Jun, the message lands like a sudden fracture, not because he believes Mori has turned away from him, but because he realizes how much he has taken their emotional closeness for granted. Memory rushes in shared beginnings, quiet evenings, the sense of being chosen without question. He feels fear, but also responsibility. Instead of reacting with anger, Jun chooses to seek understanding. He doesn't demand explanations. He doesn't accuse or retreat. He listens. And that, in many ways, is both his strength and his vulnerability. He believes that patience alone can restore what feels distant. He believes that care, consistently given, will eventually close the gap. Mori receives this care with gratitude and with heaviness, because now the silence between them is no longer just hers. It belongs to both of them. Mori realizes that the silence she once used to protect herself has slowly become distance. Jun feels it too. His patience, though sincere, has begun to erase his own needs. When he finally speaks, not to accuse but to be seen, honesty changes the emotional space between them. Mori understands then that her inner conflict was never about another person, but about parts of herself that had gone unseen: emotional presence, attentiveness, vitality. Staying silent did not mean loyalty. It meant withholding her inner world. And withholding, even unintentionally, reshapes a relationship. In the end, loyalty keeps people together, but emotional presence is what allows two hearts to truly meet and continue choosing each other with clarity rather than habit.